Hydrograph is a developer and producer of graphene and graphene technologies. CEO Kjirstin Breure is here to provide an update on the company's operations, progress, and plans. I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. Please remember this is neither a recommendation nor investment advice. Also, full disclosure, I am a shareholder of Hydrograph. I have purchased all my shares both through a prior private placement and in the open market, and I still do own a decent sized position. While Hydrograph has been a client of Market Radius in the past, I am not being compensated or paid for hosting and publishing this webinar. So thank you for everyone's participation. Kjirstin, welcome. How are things going?
Going well. And thank
Excellent.
you for having me.
All right, thanks. Getting much sleep lately?
Could be better. So
right.
we're experiencing some growing pains, but that's a good place to be in.
All right. So yeah, there's been a lot going on here. Do you want to walk through your presentation deck first or make a few opening comments? Take it away.
Sure. So if there's any new viewers here, happy to jump into the presentation. I'm aware we likely have some additional viewers just with the short report. Martin and I are aware that that was published. We will touch on that after the presentation, and I'm also aware we will likely have quite a few questions. So with that, let's dive in. I'm sure most of the audience is well aware of Hydrograph and of graphene. But just at a high level, graphene is one atomic layer of carbon atoms. It is the strongest and most conductive material ever discovered. And truly, it will usher an age of nanotechnology. So quite like silicon had really revolutionized the previous century, or even you could say oil before that, I really believe that graphene will be as pivotal in the century to come. So what Hydrograph does specifically is we have a patented explosion synthesis process, which exactly like it sounds, we explode hydrocarbon gases. So this is a CAD rendition of our reactor, and we basically pump in acetylene, which our viewers would know as a welding gas, so it's very volatile. You can imagine it's bringing a lot of energy with it into that potential reaction. We have electrodes in the top and bottom, and this mixture of acetylene and oxygen is then detonated just with that one spark from an electrode. We force that explosion. And then if you could imagine a puff of smoke crystallizing, that would be our graphene. So then we vacuum pull that into collections and then put it into packaging. So this reactor is very low CapEx. It has a production output of 10 metric tons per year. We are looking at new designs currently that would more than double that output. Our entire company is really built off of this incredibly scalable technology. So we can build these new units in a matter of months. Of course, everything is patented, a number of trade secrets. And of our pipeline of now more than 60 active customers, that is really growing very rapidly. And overwhelmingly, we find the interest from defense contracting companies and also from various government departments. I'll gloss over this because I believe most people know, but graphene does have a lot of really strong or even superlative traits, harder than a diamond, stronger than steel, more conductive than copper. This is fantastic, but it really depends on very high grade graphene. So pristine graphene, high carbon content, 100% sp2 bonding, 100% crystallinity. And this is also dependent on the host material that it's positively improving and the processing conditions. So a little bit on the team. I think most of the viewers know myself, president and CEO. I was actually the first employee of the company. I do hold a master's in material science and was recently appointed CEO in March of 24. I'll also point out Stephen Corkill, who has designed and built all of our Hyperion reactors, and of course the brilliant Dr. Sorensen, who's our VP R&D, and he is really the one that has invented everything that we're commercializing. This slide is important to touch on. I always make a note to focus on this slide. This is slightly dated, but in speaking with customers and really different, involvement in the industry, this is just as true today, I think, as it has been since 2017. So there was a journal called the Advanced Materials, and they did an analysis of 60 companies claiming to produce graphene, and they found that there is almost no high-quality graphene in the market as defined by the ISO. One of those definitions is if it's more than 10 layers, it is graphite. If it is less than 10 layers, it is graphene. They also found that no company produces over 50% graphene content, with a majority producing less than 10%, effectively meaning that most of these companies are selling fine graphite or graphite powder. We, of course, don't face any of those obstacles as we are completely synthetic. We have absolute control over our production process. Every single time we turn on the reactor, we produce 99.8% pure carbon content graphene. I want to make a point here that it is 100% graphene. The carbon content is 99.8, and that tiny amount of oxygen is actually contributing to our conductivity. And the highest, most expensive graphene that we have, which is roughly $800,000 per ton, has additional oxygen. So this is not to be considered an impurity. This is a strong benefit with our graphene that only we are producing. We have also been tested as pure by numerous third parties and numerous worldwide labs, and also verified by the Graphene Council. And just the last slide that I'll touch on quickly, we have a partnership with the GEEC, and that's the Graphene Engineering Innovation Center that's located in Manchester, which is the birthplace of graphene. So graphene was discovered at the university in 2004. And really after that discovery, there erupted a very strong ecosystem, which resulted in this innovation hub that we call the GEEC. So we have a private lab there at the GEEC, and we have a team of application scientists. So PhDs, mostly in materials, chemists, physics, and they are engaged in research that is mostly confidential to Hydrograph. But what's important to note is that the GEEC has their own staff, where they have this team of scientists and engineers that interact with customers all over the world. So when customers want to integrate graphene into their product line, they go to the GEEC. And so an example I frequently give is Rolls-Royce might want an anti-corrosive engine component. So they might go to the GEEC and they might say, you know, these are our specifications. Do you have a graphene that would suit what we're doing? And because the GEEC has firsthand experience working with the commercially available graphenes, they can A, select a graphene, or B, benchmark graphenes against each other. Every single project that we've done has been extremely successful, and every time we've been benchmarked against another graphene, we have come out on top. And again, you know, I don't want to make a point to say we're competitive with other graphene companies. I believe we should be competitive against legacy materials. We are very open to collaborating with other graphene companies, and I really think the future is kind of a blend of different nanomaterials. The last thing I'll say here is that this is actually, funny enough, where we were introduced to the US Army and the US Navy. It is through that work, and we've been working with them for roughly just over a year via the GEEC staff, that there is now interest in a US GEEC that would be funded by the US military. And we do believe that Hydrograph will be playing a very strong role. So I think with that, I will stop the sharing and we can get to the many questions that I'm sure that we have. And I will also touch on a few points. Or did you want to add anything at this point, Martin, or do you want
No,
to?
go ahead. Why don't
Okay.
you say your thing, and then we
Sure.
can have questions and move on from there.
Sure. So a couple things, you know, I have to, of course, be cautious to not disclose anything that I have not already disclosed in a press release or other means. But what I do want to make a point in saying is that I have been very honest about the interest that we have had from the US government. And what I can speak to, which I think is very clear to anyone that's going to be looking into the current political climate, current grant funding, and really where money is being spent, is that graphene is now understood as a critical mineral. It is now even a national security interest. So Hydrograph, of course, has US patents and is US based. We have always been US based because the patent that we've licensed from Kansas State University, we really wanted to maintain that team, which is mostly Dr. Sorensen and Stephen Corkill. So we wanted to keep that talent really where it was located. Because we have a synthetic process, we have almost unlimited production capacity, which is of course attractive to someone like the US government. And further, the DoD is really under mandate to prioritize US companies. And so all of this considered, and especially with our very, very strong performance benefits, This is really, I think, what has led to the amount of interest that we have felt. And when we look at some of the target applications we've talked about, composites, coatings, even a small amount of graphene can often lightweight or strengthen something by, let's say, 20 to 40% is often the range we see. Sometimes it's up to 80%. If we could lightweight, a majority of the components, for example, on a fighter jet, that would be a massive benefit to the US military. And I'm throwing out an example right now, but you can start to imagine just the sheer amount of applications that would be possible. And when we think about Chinese graphite export restrictions, this is now a growing concern, of course, for the US military and for, I would say, America and its allies. So we are very interested, of course, in supporting where we can. And I think, again, if you really look at the climate, it makes sense that this is the current motivation. I think
Uh,
with that, Martin, why don't we dive into the questions? Because a couple of my other points I think will probably come up quite naturally.
All right. I guess the one thing you put out news today on Cordell Bennigsen.
Yeah.
There is a question about he was issued some RSUs as well. Can you just get, like, you're adding people to the team, just give us maybe his significance?
Absolutely. So not only does he have experience as a leader, Harvard MBA, he has been CEO of multiple defense contracting companies, which one of them is a current position. He is also really just bringing that operational expertise and that defense contracting experience, because anyone that does have any experience with defense contracting companies, there are a lot of regulations we need to abide by. There's a whole process, it's really its own ecosystem. And I feel that his expertise there is really going to be beneficial as we move to what is overwhelmingly, I would say, opportunities within that space.
All right. I've tried to group the questions into common themes here.
Mhm.
So when you refer to pristine graphene, which is what you produce, is that a bit of a marketing term, or like, obviously you have very high purity? What do you mean by pristine graphene?
That's a good question. So pristine graphene in its true technical term is quite specific. So I want to compare what we have, which is really just carbon. You could also put CBD graphene in the same bracket versus graphene oxide or reduced graphene oxide. So when graphene is produced via, graphite, you really have to, in Chris's terms, kick the crap out of it to get it to that state that it's usable. So this is not considered pristine graphene just because it has a huge oxygen content. I mean, we have a fraction of a percent. Graphene oxide is often 20, 30% oxygen. And as I've talked about on other appearances, the lattice gets disrupted. There are a number of other issues with that, and that would be why other companies, especially when they're starting with graphite, are not able to call it pristine.
All right. Your IP, could you just review how well protected is your intellectual property, both through patents
Mhm.
and just expertise in running your machinery? You probably don't want to patent everything, as maybe that lets out some of your trade secrets. So could you just review your IP?
Exactly. And so I did see some questions as well on why we're not showing the entire process. That's because we need to maintain some confidentiality. That is really the value of the company. We don't want to give away anything that would be a trade secret, which we have numerous trade secrets. We've also applied for numerous patents to really strengthen that moat. So I have touched on this in other appearances, but there have been companies, even within the US, that have tried to circumvent our patent. And all of those applications have been rejected by the US Patent Office. So while we are always looking for additional protections, we are relatively confident that what we have, is extremely secure, as it's been for years. And we also have IP insurance on that.
Can we talk about the different segments that there's a question here on, given the conductivity, and a question about solar panels and batteries, how how much you're pursuing that market. Could you talk about the main markets you're going after and what your priority markets are?
So still overwhelmingly composites and coatings. And the reason for that is it is fast to get to revenue. we, as a pre-revenue, I know we do have some revenue, but it's minimal. We need to see revenue as quickly as possible. So while we're very interested in energy storage devices and technologies, including solar panels, a lot of these are a much longer development cycle than what we would prefer. So what we see as really the low-hanging fruit is, again, industrial plastic packaging, these highly engineered fibers, which would include nylon, PEEK. There's a huge area here. I would also include industrial coatings, where it is relatively quick to bring something to market. And I think that once we have that near-term revenue, we can start to look at a lot of these other areas that will inevitably be years of testing and large opportunities, but it's still time to bring something to market.
All right. There have been some questions regarding certification and FDA approvals, given the real nano size of the product you make, potential health concerns and environmental concerns. Can you review where you are on approvals, what any potential health or environmental risks there are?
Sure. So on FDA, I would say that's a very, very small portion of our pipeline at this point, just because there have been so many defense-related opportunities that have come through. I'm not seeing that, like, I don't think shareholders should be very concerned. With that said, we have a number of customers that are looking at ways around that while we're waiting for that to come to pass. And the reason it can be slow is because there's no company that really has something like graphene with FDA approval. So there's some testing conditions that they are actually trying to adjust that would enable it. So without making that a long story, we are looking at putting the PET enhanced or graphene enhanced PET kind of as a sandwich in the middle of these different plastic layers. And that's a way to commercialize something because the layer is kind of impregnated by other plastic layers. Therefore, it is not touching anything that would be food contact. For EPA approval, it is admittedly, it has been a slow process. We have had some changes at the federal level that I think have impacted a lot of the graphene companies or nanomaterial companies. We do believe it's going to be in hand very soon. We were just recently in touch. Everything in our file is going very well. I'm hoping that we're going to have an update even by next quarter. And lastly, just in terms of toxicology of graphene, graphene is not like a carbon nanotube. So it does not puncture the cell wall. It is very benign. There are studies using it internally. There are studies using it in vaccines and biosensors as drug delivery systems. There was a study published by Nature where people were intentionally inhaling it for months at a time. I would probably not volunteer for that study, but it did happen, and there were no negative effects. So again, I think there should always be caution with something new, but I don't believe that it is as dangerous as many are led to believe.
Has there been any research like so the forever chemicals? Sorry, it's drawing
PFAS.
blank in PFAS. Has there been? Do you think there's a risk? Has that type of getting in the water system and 10 years from now going, oops, this graphene stuff that we saw was awesome, has some bad side effects here or affects the environment? Has that been studied at all, that if it's not a risk now is a potential risk, or has it been kind of gotten a clean bill of health?
Couple things there. We are one of the few companies that the graphene does not contain PFAS. A lot of the other graphene production companies actually, just because of their feedstocks, their resulting graphene does have forever chemicals, which I think is an issue. So we have the opportunity to remove those forever chemicals from different materials. But to your question, graphene really shouldn't be any different from carbon black, and that's been in existence for more than 100 years. It's very similar in scale and morphology. Obviously, this is more crystalline, but I think from that perspective of really just the particle size, I don't believe that there should be any more danger, especially since we've shown that these particles are not, again, puncturing a cell wall or really should be a danger in a water system.
Moving on to your production and production plans, can you review where are you at with both the IP and your technology team, I believe, is based in Kansas, and
Mhm.
you have plans in Texas for growing production. And that, where are we, and what can you tell us about what your, I don't know, near and longer term plans are? And sorry, just as a bit of a side note, you've got a bit of a chicken and egg thing. You're trying to both move you need customers to order significant quantities, and you need to have the production. Having production today maybe wouldn't do a lot if you don't have the demand. So, and you do have limited resources at this point. So you're having to budget things. So in the context of that, where are you on production and your near and longer term production outlook?
Yes, so we still have Manhattan open, of course. That will be open for roughly another year. So we have
And
that.
sorry, Manhattan, Kansas, right?
Yes, the other Manhattan, Kansas. So we will keep that open. We want to have that redundancy. We never want to be in a position where we are unable to produce. So that unit that we have there, we're building a second. That one has been running very effectively for more than 2 years. We have a very large amount on hand. So we believe that we have really everything we need as we continue testing and even larger order sizes from customers that are now entering the next phase of their development cycles. Austin's going to be our headquarters. So we're going to have a industrial flex space with a corporate presence and kind of a machining or innovation zone in the back where we can continue to make improvements on the reactors. So Austin, again, will really be the true home base for Hydrograph, but we will also have a large scale production facility elsewhere in Texas. We will be disclosing the location quite soon. I've talked about how this is it's a complicated agreement because there's a lot of parts to it. You know, it's a greenfield build. We're also having a supply agreement or purchase agreement for the acetylene. There's a lot of regulatory aspects to this agreement. So that is why it takes time, but we should have that really ready to disclose within the next month, I believe. So we are looking forward to that. We are also looking forward to disclosing more on the timeline for Austin as well.
Are you able to discuss the required capex you'll need to build out? Presumably not in one phase, but the sort of the head office and then the large term production facility, and ideally what the sort of milestones would be on when construction beginning and when you'd be up and running?
Sure. So Austin is going to be relatively affordable. This is not a huge capex spend. It's going to be an existing facility that will make minor improvements to. Houston will be significant, mostly just the reactors. And again, even though the capex is very low and the return is very high, it is still a capital outlay for the company. So to give concrete numbers, I would prefer that we will be putting together a full press release with a lot more of the financials behind this and a lot more of the Texas expansion plan.
Can you say how much production capacity you have at this point with your Kansas operations? And is that running full time and you keep building up inventory, or do you have enough sort of buffer to get through the trial processes that are going so you're not just full time running production here?
Previously, it wasn't just because we have been a small team, but now it is going to be running full time. We're going to bulk up that inventory really just in advance of the Texas migration. And I would say also just from the interest that we have from customers, we again really want to make sure that we're in a position that we always have enough to satisfy demand.
Let's move on to the customer side of things. I believe you mentioned there's a pipeline of 60 potential customers. Did I get that number right out there?
Yes, that's more realistic, a minimum at this point, as we've
Okay.
added quite a few even in the past few weeks, but we could say 60.
How do they get to be on the client list? You've sent them samples, they've signed, I don't know, some kind of development agreements. And can you talk about your sales funnel, about what puts them to the development stage and sort of near-term sales, and just talk about your whole business development funnel and how close to the end are some of your clients, potential clients?
Sure. So in the first phase would really just be discovery. That's when we've had the introduction, we've sent samples. Where a lot of them are in right now is review. That means we have done really that pilot scale test. We've done the industrial scale up, and then really the last phase is going to be negotiation. A pretty large amount of customers are not yet in the pipeline, either because they come from the geek and they're under a confidentiality agreement with the geek, or because they have come through a third party. And for example, we have the compounding program. So we work with different compounders, and we might get customers that we're still waiting on formal volumes from through these third parties. So I would say our sales force is very conservative because we want to ensure that we really have maximum visibility before we're counting it as a formal number in our pipeline.
Can you give, would it be unreasonable for investors to expect any material sales or sales agreements to be announced this year? Or is that something more, would that be for a 2026 event?
Same, I think, as I've been saying in other interviews, it is possible this year. Whatever we're getting this year is going to be on the smaller side. We've been pretty consistent with that. The largest opportunities are coming next year. And I would also say that the more it moves to defense, it kind of depends on what the project is. The really, really exciting ones will inevitably require more testing. If you're going to put something in a jet, you want to make sure it's completely safe. And there's a very strict protocol to commercialize these products. But I would also say that because there's so much variety, there will absolutely be those opportunities that we'll be commercializing and seeing revenue really as soon as, I think, the beginning towards middle of 2026.
In your pipeline, I presume you have some ability to sort of foster certain clients along or give them priority. Are you trying to create, like, move the really large opportunities, and I guess probably larger opportunities probably have a longer lead time to it, but also then move maybe some smaller near-term ones ahead, just so you can show the market some traction? And as the market can be a little impatient sometimes, but are you trying to manage that how do you prioritize your clients? Is it just the total opportunity size? Maybe some are huge but higher risk. Can you talk about how you manage the trade-offs and where you put the effort on different business development opportunities?
Sure. So I would say we are not prioritizing anything with higher risk. And I would, again, bring the FDA approval for PET as an example. That was started by previous management. FDA takes a long time. So that has fallen a little bit lower in terms of our prioritization. But the full list, we have a huge Excel file on this. There is market readiness, there's our data, there's customer negotiations, or really understanding what the customer pain points are. For every application, there are going to be different metrics that we look for, and we basically weight each material based on the value that we think we can deliver, what our data would point towards, obviously the economic profile, and ultimately speed to market. I would say if there's one thing that we're prioritizing right now, it's really speed to market and the value that we're offering for the highest return on investment here.
And you have, like, someone here is quoting, and this is a quote from a question, so you can validate it or not, 250,000 US per ton. And I believe there's another question out here saying 750,000 per ton for different types of different flavors of your graphene. Can you comment on that, and talk about how you figure out pricing? Is it, like, obviously that's just based on the value, or largely on the value you're providing your customers in lightweighting or strengthening, and the value that provides to that specific application. So I've rambled on a bit there. Just, can you talk a bit about pricing?
Sure. So we will likely not go below $250,000 per ton. That's really our flagship product. That's what we use for a lot of the applications. What we would say are graphene derivatives, are functionalizations. That's a post-processing condition. So it might be adding carboxylic acid, might be increasing the conductivity, the surface area. So we have a number of processes that we can put the graphene through. And for example, our electrical grade, what we call, has additional oxygen added, which I've touched on previously, and that one is the highest price tag, roughly $800,000 per ton. That would be going for energy storage devices, these highly engineered fibers, especially something that would be used for EMI shielding. So it really depends, again, on the application, how much is used. If there's a situation that we are going to be using a very small amount for a biosensor, we're going to be charging more for that application just because the volume commitment is not going to be making sense for Hydrograph for the value that we're delivering. So huge amount, I would say, of differences between different industries, but that's something that we're constantly analyzing.
When you and I presume there's probably been some negotiation or pre-negotiation on what a sales agreement would look like. Do you imagine that these agreements would include like minimum usage amounts or maybe scaled pricing? The first whatever ton is at this price. Can you, how would one view, broadly speaking, a sales agreement to look like for Hydrograph?
Again, it does depend. There is some level of reduced prices with higher volumes, certainly, and there are some commitments. We are not offering exclusivity. We could look at that if there would be some royalty associated for some very specific royalty. We're not opposed to that, but at this point, we just have so much interest that we don't feel inclined to really offer that. And again, most are really going to be having take or pay. So pretty standard supply agreements and very dependent on the customer and the industry.
All right. And this sort of falling into the capital markets strategy. Have you looked at sort of prepayments or to help fund you initially, that maybe they get a discount and they prepay and sort of lock in first in production? Anything to help out your own business or operational development?
Yes, absolutely. We are exploring a lot of options like that. And I would also add, to slightly change the conversation, I know a lot of shareholders have been very concerned about a potential takeover bid. We have added a standstill agreement to our NDAs and to our other documents, and we are also reviewing a shareholders' rights program with the board.
All right. Okay. I think we've covered a lot here. Why don't, since I mentioned the capital markets, can you review what, as specific as you can be, what are your general capital markets plan in terms of fundraising? I presume you are going to have to raise some funds in the short to medium term. You've raised some money, presumably from warrant exercise. If you can discuss maybe how much has been exercised, and if you can comment on what the balance sheet looks like right now and how much of a runway that potentially gives you.
Sure. So we now have about 10.5 million Canadian in the bank. That's roughly 12 months runway. We will have some upcoming facility costs, but we are looking at non-dilutive means of securing capital. We're not looking to raise right now. We have had incredible momentum despite the short selling that we saw today, which I think is kind of natural, especially with the run up that we had, which was really a week or more of consistent gains. So yeah, not looking to raise right now. We do have quite a bit of upcoming news from now through fall. So I think that with these additional milestones, I think people listening have been following Kevin Bambro on x.com. He is very willing to assist us with securing non-dilutive capital. So we are just exploring all options currently, still targeting a NASDAQ uplisting, where now we really hit all of the requirements. I do believe that we will hit $4 share price in US dollars in advance of our anticipated February uplist. We'll, of course, be disclosing a lot of information really as that draws near. And again, we have not formally engaged a bank to do that.
I would typically with a NASDAQ listing would also come a concurrent financing. Would one, is it fair to say that yes, you would do one? Can you give at all any kind of indication on how potentially large that could be?
There are different ways to qualify for the listing. So previously it would have been $20 million US, but because we're a foreign issuer, it is about 5, but there are ways to do it without an equity round. So we are discussing that with various banks. In any event, if we do an equity round, it would very likely be quite small, just with the amount of capital that we have in the bank and the interest that we have from various parties for non-dilutive capital. So again, exploring options, but a lot of this should be clarified even by the end of the year.
You said with the 10 million you have in the bank, that gives you about a 12-month runway. I presume that's more on an operational basis. It doesn't include CapEx required to build out the production facility. Is that on the assumption of some kind of non-dilutive financing that would fund that portion of it? Could you flesh that out a bit?
That's correct. So that would be apart from the additional cost that we will have with the Texas expansion, assuming that we secure debt financing, project financing, or another mean. With that said, we do have a few million more in warrants that we believe will be exercised. We have not triggered an acceleration, so we could do so. And I think the pain we would feel from inevitably some selling would be minimized at this point.
All right. I've gone through my questions, and I have in the Q&A funnel are 86 questions, and I'll need a moment here to sort of review them. A lot of the topics have been addressed already, so I just need to scroll down here. Someone is asking about a future movie about Hydrograph, so that is unexpected. How long is the ramp up and production process, I presume? How long will that take once you have signed an agreement, which I presume is a sales agreement?
So we can build the units in a matter of months and really at scale. I know it doesn't sound like it, but at scale, there are some efficiencies that we have not seen. So for example, we plan to use engineering firms to help us with procurement, with assembly, obviously nothing that would be confidential. All of the things or components that would be associated with trade secrets would be produced in-house. But I think the point might also be asking, there are some I would say, hurdles to overcome just with the Texas expansion. I mean, we're building a facility, we are applying for permits, there's some regulatory considerations. So, of course, there is a timeline with that. But like I mentioned, we should be operational by middle of 2026. And then it should be pretty rapid for us to consistently commission these additional reactors.
So with your coming online in middle 2026, you're building up inventory, you expect sales in like first or second quarter. It sounds like things are aligning where the production should be ramping up right around the same time that sales are hopefully kicking in.
Absolutely. We are more and more confident in these upcoming sales really by the day. And like I mentioned, overwhelmingly, I would say for engineering fibers, mostly defense, as we get clarity, we will be able, I'm hoping to really tightly time the continued build and purchase of these reactors.
Someone's asking if you need short-term like production to fulfill near-term sales. Is there anything you can do to set up a temporary lab or a like short-term production facility to fill in any gaps?
We won't need that because we do have Manhattan still operational and it will be producing graphene until May of 2026. And at that point, we have a gradual transition either to Austin or to the new Texas production facility location.
Will you maintain an R&D lab in Kansas, or is everything going to be moved down to Texas, do you anticipate?
So we are very open to that. Dr. Sorensen is an older gentleman. If he tells me he wants to stay in Kansas and he wants a lab, I will make that happen. And
Okay.
I would be very happy if he would be moving to Austin.
There's a question here that says, how can we be confident in the commercial adoption of graphene? And I'm going to refer to a conversation I was having with a friend of mine about graphene, where he had looked into the market opportunities. Graphene's gone through a few cycles over the past years, more on the natural mined graphite and graphene. And it's actually quite a small market as it is currently.
Mhm.
Do you why isn't it a bigger market? Is it just that the right product like your own isn't there to fill the demand, that the production capacity hasn't been there to fill it up? Talk about the market size and why you think it can expand to be such a large opportunity.
Right. I mean, at risk of being a bit offensive, most of the graphene in the market is crap. It's not real graphene, it's graphite powder. And that goes back to the slide that I shared from the Journal of Advanced Materials. But worse than that, when we talk to customers, you have no idea how many customers we're working with. Global automotive companies, the world's largest plastics producers, I mean, military organizations, they have tried all of the other graphenes. They've even commercialized products with these other graphenes, and they're moving away from them because they don't work. And I think that a lot of these companies were really good at kind of shoving their products forward, but batch to batch, there's no consistency, and often the graphene doesn't match the data sheet. And I don't want to speak negatively about the industry because I think it's good for all of us to rise together, but it is a big issue. And unfortunately, it does affect companies like Hydrograph, because if a customer's tried something and it didn't work and they feel lied to by that company, they're going to immediately be distrustful of graphene and other nanomaterials. And that is an obstacle that we are constantly having to overcome. And I feel relieved that I think now the word has gotten out. Thanks to the geek, I would say that's been a huge catalyst for us. I think there's more and more confidence in Hydrograph, but I think it's still something the industry has to overcome.
All right. Has Hydrograph announced another geek type agreement in the Middle East? Sorry, I'm pulling out of the cobwebs here in my brain. And I think there was a question I got emailed that may have not fit in there. Am I right on remembering that? Or are there any other geek type agreements beyond what you already mentioned in the US that Hydrograph is working on?
Yes, we had a partnership with Khalifa. I don't think
Yes.
I've talked about this in some time, and I think I'm free to comment on it. I think that could have been a very good fit, but they are a bit more university-like as opposed to innovation hub-like. And with that being said, I feel that the research there was just very early stage. And for us, maybe in the future, that makes a lot of sense, but we really have to focus on revenue as soon as possible. So we're not looking to do more research to do more research. And I think that as we grow, more of these opportunities will be possible, but it hasn't really developed into the innovation hub that I think we were hoping when we had signed.
All right. Someone is asking what Kjirstin thinks are the main risks for Hydrograph at this time. And I guess the standard old question, what keeps you up at night?
So I feel that our technology is de-risked to a huge degree. I think there's always a risk when you're upscaling something. If you're going from 10 metric tons to 20 or 25, I think there's always some risk there. I think there's always some risk moving a facility to a new state. So I think there are inherent risks that any company would face. I do believe there's probably some level of continuing to educate the market, but everything we've done has performed so well. And again, the interest that we have from customers, I think, is the most reassuring to everyone internally with Hydrograph, that even though it's hard to time the market because there's just so much testing that's involved with commercializing material. And these are things that are going to be in existence in products for decades, which is great. So it's going to be very sticky. I think the most challenging thing is really just timing and continuing to update the market. But I'm not really up at night anymore. I think I was years previous, but I'm feeling very, very confident about our future at this point.
All right. What will gross margins look like after getting pipeline access agreements for acetylene? Will you be the lowest cost producer of graphene?
So I've been saying, roughly 70. It will be higher than 70 after the pipeline, after we have access to the pipeline. What was the second part?
Sorry, I was just trying to figure out my next question.
Will
Will
be
you
the
be the
lowest
lowest
cost.
cost producer? And I
So
guess add that, will that even really matter? It's all about kind of the value. And that's a leading question.
exactly.
So,
Exactly. I don't think we'll never be the lowest cost, like per kilo. the lowest we are is $250 per kilo. You have Nano Explorer making it for what, $10 or $20, way, way lower. But the value that we give to customers, because with the graphene that comes from graphite, which I wouldn't really call even graphene, there are negatives with it. So if you have a benefit, let's say in your compressive strength, sometimes you're losing flexural strength. We don't have that. When we give an improvement, we have across the board improvements at the lowest loadings in the industry. We're often using 10 to 100 times less. So even though we are on the higher end in terms of cost, once you combine our value in the application, we are often the cheapest, or at least we're at par. And then we don't have those negatives that are associated with our integration.
Okay, so just to reiterate that and be clear about it, you may
Mhm.
actually need to use less of yours. So if yours is twice the price, but you need to use half as much, crudely speaking, so it's not just on a per pound basis, it's a lot of factors come into play.
Right. If we're using 1/100th of ours, it doesn't matter that we're more expensive. It's gonna be cheaper.
Okay, all right. And it's the whole value proposition. All right.
Exactly.
Emailed question here from Prefor. Please describe the prices and grades of various qualities of acetylene and their application use in your products.
We get very high grade acetylene. We don't feel that going over 99.9, whatever it would be, is making a big difference. But I would say to that the acetylene that we are currently receiving, which is either using a solvent of acetone or DMF, because you have to use a solvent to get it in those cylinders, which we buy in a bulk pack. So that's 9 acetylene cylinders. Because of the solvent, we are really looking forward to the pipeline, which will have some, because there is inevitably going to be acetylene from other production areas that would inevitably wind up there, but we will have a huge benefit in purity by locating with the pipeline. I hope that made sense. I feel like I gave a lot of details there.
So right now you're buying acetylene in tanks, and that is of am I right to that's a lesser grade, or there's some impurities in that given the way of it's being delivered?
Yes, because you have to compress it, and because it's explosive, you have to put it in a solvent, normally DMF or acetone. It's very hard to kind of suck up the acetylene with not sucking up the DMF. So we don't want to have those impurities in our graphene. And our version of impurity is nothing like, I think, what other companies deal with that use solvents in their actual production process. So overwhelmingly 99.9% of the time, we're not taking in any of that solvent. But when we locate with the pipeline, there's almost no solvent within that acetylene, because it's produced right there, right? So we're going to have massive benefits. And also just the flow rate that we're going to have with a pipeline is going to give huge benefits to the production process. It's going to run a lot more smoothly.
All right. With the acetylene, are there any, because the acetylene is a hydrocarbon, there's hydrogen and carbon. A lot of the carbon is going into the graphene. The hydrogen is a byproduct. Are there any other byproduct or sort of toxic outputs or valuable outputs where you can capture that hydrogen and use it for other purposes or resell it or anything like that?
Potentially. I think it depends a little bit on location, because usually with gases, there's a cost with compressing, storing, and transporting. But if we look at the chemical formula, so acetylene is C2H2 plus O2, oxygen. Put that in our chamber, ignite it with a spark from an electrode. All of the carbon, or most of the carbon from the hydrocarbon, C2H2, gets crystallized into pure C. And then the exhaust would be CO, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen. So we call that combined syngas. We could separate it using membrane separation and just take the hydrogen. I don't know if it's going to be cost effective. So the worst case scenario we're looking at is we just pump that into a generator and we sell energy back to the grid.
Okay.
Or we
All right.
power a facility, not that we need a lot of power, but we could.
Okay. You talked about most of the carbon goes into gets turned into graphene. So a small amount of the carbon gets No, unused. So you could, so if you had doing a ton of graphene, it wouldn't be too hard to figure out the math of how much acetylene needs to go in there to create, like, to figure out how much carbon is from that to create that ton of carbon.
Right. I'm not going to disclose our ratios, but that's correct.
Okay.
And overwhelmingly, it gets crystallized into graphene.
James Tour at Rice University, is their graphene output comparable to that of hydrographs?
I have heard of James Tour. I don't think it's comparable. I think there are some commonalities. They are inevitably going to be using more energy. They've talked about putting it in plastic or other carbon containing compounds. But if you think about that, molecules have to go somewhere. So they're going to have a toxic byproduct. And what we've heard in the industry is it doesn't really function the same. Usually with these other production methods, you get lower conductivity, and you inevitably get some impurities just due to the feedstock.
All right. There's a question here. Are you still on track to receive FDA approval by the end of 2025? Are you giving any guidance on expected FDA approval, or is that just a future mark?
No, we'll update that. We have slowed that down. I touched on that briefly in the beginning of this call, but just because that's a very small part of our pipeline compared to the other very attractive opportunities, we don't feel that that should be a point of stress for us. And because the FDA has kind of changed, not changed, they're updating for an understanding of graphene. Graphene doesn't qualify based on their own metrics. So this is something that is going to slow it, that is out of our hands. And just for those reasons, we're going to focus on other applications.
All right. You did address your intellectual property, but someone is concerned of how vulnerable are the units from being copied by foreign actors who maybe not like China or whoever else, who are not necessarily contained or constrained by domestic patents.
You know, that's always a risk, and I think it's hard for any company to really defend that. It's of course much harder for smaller companies. That I would be honest in saying is a pretty large part of our interest in the US government's interest in us. I think the more that we can be in that ecosystem, they have offered quite a lot of support, as I believe they're offering to other companies that would fall under that critical mineral umbrella. The better we can protect it with, strategic partners, the better positioned we all will be.
I guess previously in a presentation, you said 10 to 15, and corrected us if this is wrong, 10 to 15 million in CapEx would be needed to generate 100 million in sales revenues. Is that still the case? And when would you expect that those kind of numbers could potentially be hit?
Right. So we have more than $10 million in pipeline revenue projected for next year. The CapEx on the next generation reactor, which is going to have a production output of more than 20 metric tons annually, is closer to $500,000. So I would say that, the economic potential is massive here. The payoff is almost immediately. And as mentioned, because we do believe this will be a hockey stick, everything in Texas is ready for, we just build out the walls and we continue to fill it with additional reactors. So it's completely built with expansion in mind.
For military applications, and I presume they're numerous, how much has it been, like, there's a question here, has it been tested? I'm sure it's been tested to some extent, but I'm sure there are multiple layers and levels of testing. Can you talk about the types of testing that both the military and the others do? Maybe initial testing or wear and tear testing. Does it maintain it? Does it maybe degrade plastics or other materials over time or under heat? Can you talk about the types of testing that are being done?
I cannot give a lot of details here, but I would say the near-term revenue opportunities have been tested fully. I can't really say exactly what they are, but the really cool things are going to be a lot more testing and likely more than 2 years away, which I think wouldn't be surprising to anyone.
All right. How many projects have you done at Geek?
Well, we have, oh gosh, I'm not even sure if I know off the top of my head. We have funded probably 15, 10 to 15. we have been involved in, I don't know how many, because they're under confidentiality agreements with various customers. So that is something that I would say is really kind of taking on its own life. I would also add that even the ones that we have funded, we often do get support from customers down the road, or we have some cost share agreement. So mostly we get R&D paid for at this point.
Can you talk about your burn rate and your spending, including like your business development expenses and like promotional activities? Is that either for stock or for business development? How are you spending money on that?
Yes, I think so. A couple points here, and maybe just to kind of draw attention back to this short report, which I would say was hard to find something that was accurate in that. I know that is just par for the course with having the momentum that we've had, but to touch on promotion. So, of course, we promote, but what is classified as promotion includes me traveling to investor conferences. It is our business development team traveling to trade shows. That includes our booth setup, everything that goes around with it. And all of these activities are activities that I'm confident shareholders support. So I do believe that's been heavily mischaracterized. Um, we're not doing any digital marketing. I think, you touched on in the beginning, even of this webinar, this is not paid. The last thing we've paid for was the CEO.ca interview, which was mostly just due to the studio fees that they have because it was filmed in a studio and they have their own costs, which we covered. Again, nothing digital. We are not paying for any group to promote us. We are not paying Kevin Bambro to promote us. So that one was, I think, very misleading. And I would also say looping in our funding partners, especially looping in Power One with, some of the phrases used, some of the other names, I found that pretty offensive. So I think, they've been a great supporter of the company. And again, that was one of the things that bothered me in the short report. I'm sure there's quite a few other points, but I would prefer not to give it additional oxygen.
This is a little bit to do with that, but I am legitimately curious. The Graphene Council and your certification from there. Can you talk about the Graphene Council, who they are, what they are, and kind of their standing in the industry?
Right. So they're basically a trade association that's here for graphene companies. Just because there's been so little regulation around graphene, there's been so little in terms of standards. I really appreciate that they're taking that first stab at it, and I think that the Graphene Council certification that they run is really a step in the right direction. It's probably not perfect, and I have touched on in other interviews that what that is that's saying that we make what we say that we make. So they're matching our graphene samples to our data sheet. So they come in and they do analysis in-house. I think it's important to note, though, that apart from the analysis that they do to confirm our production process in-house, they send samples to worldwide labs. So, for example, NPL received an anonymous sample, they run the characterization, and they came back. And that is really a lot because this was years ago that we did it the first time, and now we're getting it renewed. A lot of that information is what ultimately has developed into our current data sheet. And we're always getting our graphene retested. Of course, every batch is tested and characterized. But this is an independent party. NPL is probably one of the best labs really on earth for graphene related characterization. So I do think in that sense, it's a good standard. But because it only says what graphene is produced matches the data sheet, I think it could use some improvement because it doesn't really say much about the quality.
Okay. Okay. So you're just it validates you're saying what you're saying. You're
Right.
doing what you're saying you're doing. And if you said you had really low quality graphene or graphite, then it would say, "Yep, you get the stamp. You're doing what you say you're doing." Is
But
that
even
fair?
I'll even give another example. A lot of people talk about the carbon content and they say, oh, well, this company, they make 99.9% carbon content graphene. That's higher than Hydrograph. I get that. It sounds like it is, but if you're missing the sp2 bonding and the crystallinity, it's probably not graphene. And what matters, what investors, I would encourage them to look at the data that the companies are publishing, the application data. How does it work in a material, especially something that's published by third party? It doesn't matter what carbon content we're touting, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. No one's going to buy it. And that is what's held back the industry. So why are these other companies not landing contracts? Why is the industry not bigger? It's because it's not working. And for us, we have not only announced more data. I know, retail investors are very impatient to have us having revenue, but these are very long development cycles just due to the testing, but it all is hinging on the data. And now that we have really this abundant data that proves overwhelmingly how well we are performing, and again, to repeat, often 100 times less graphene is used, between 10 and 100 times. That's a massive difference from the rest of the industry.
Well, and what I think people don't get with graphene is, well, it's carbon, and so
Mhm.
are diamonds, and so is coal. And where gold is gold or copper is copper, it's not just the content, it's the structure, it's the size, it's many dimensions, not just the purity of it.
Exactly.
Are there any limitations on the license Hydrograph has with the university to maintain exclusive use of the patents?
No, we have full worldwide marketing rights, which basically means we have exclusive rights to that technology.
Are there any time limits for how long they're valid for?
Until the patent expires, which is roughly 2036.
And are you, I'm no patent lawyer, but if you sort of build patents on the prior patents, I believe in essence, you can extend that out by
Yes.
building more of a moat. Have you been doing that? So there are some newer patents that pushes you further into the future?
Yes, the most recent is called particulate materials, and that was issued in 2022, and that should again broaden that moat. So I am very confident that that will continue that, but we're always looking at additional patents to really extend that patent security.
All right. And I think you addressed it, but just be very clear on this question. Are there any plans for a financing, a placement, and at the market financing agreement for the next 6 months?
No, I get an offer probably 3 or 4 times a day from most people that I've ever spoken to, every bank, every investor, all favorable terms. We could be raising 50, 100 million right now with this momentum. We are not looking for capital. We have rejected all of those offers. We know that we have upcoming news and we are very excited to really just continue this momentum and, short selling apart. I really think that we're really just getting off the ground right now.
All right. I like the confidence there. With there's a question here mentioning a different graphene company, which I don't feel like mentioning, but that company is producing some products of its own with the graphene. Are you looking at all to go down the value chain and either create some more intermediate products or end products, or are you just going to be a graphene ingredient supplier, call it, and just really build up your IP and not compete with your competitor, with your customers per se?
So what inevitably happens, and I feel the motivation behind some of these companies, if you can make a product, it's a lot harder to get your hands on the graphene and start testing. And to take a random aside here, we're the only company at the Geek that's just giving away graphene because we're so confident it will work every time. We just let them, we have always tens of kilos on hand for them to give to customers. We've told them we don't care who you give it to because we're not worried that we're going to get a bad result, because most of these companies, they're not giving graphene freely because they're worried that the test isn't going to work and it's going to make them look bad. These other companies are making products because it's a way to kind of disguise a poor performing graphene, in my opinion. But from a business model perspective, it takes a lot of time to go that far downstream. And then you're immediately kind of isolating yourself in one area of the market. For us, when we know that we have the highest performing material on earth, why would we do that? I mean, we can sell to everyone. And I think that looking at, licensing rights, or royalties for different, very niche applications, I think that makes sense. And I think, of course, just selling the graphene, I think selling inks and dispersions, that makes a lot of sense working with compounders. But really making products, it's so much work for little return when we could quite quickly dominate the market by just getting our graphene in everyone's hands.
Okay. I don't quite understand this question, but I'll read it out and see what you make of it. Have you received TSCA clearance, PMN/SNUN plus consent order, if applicable, to sell graphene at commercial volumes in the US?
That is all in progress. A lot of that's tied to EPA. We are also working on REACH for Europe, so that should be in hand shortly.
Are these all EPA type
Mhm.
steps or processes in their clearance?
Different regulations, yes.
Gotcha. All right. Um, Actually, we've had a couple questions on the insider ownership as well as your and I'm sorry, his name is not popping to my head. The doctor, the PhD who invented technology. Uh, your ownership in the company through options or RSUs and the whole
Mhm.
teams. I don't know, any comments to make on that?
Sure. So I think a big part of this is really the definition of insider, which is members of the board, and then key people in the C-suite. So VPs are not considered owners. If VPs were considered owners, our ownership levels would be much, much higher. So Dr. Sorensen as well as Stephen Corkle, I think they'd be comfortable for me saying they have each put in a huge amount of their own money into purchasing shares in the past, and each of them own millions of shares in Hydrograph. For myself, most of mine is in equity as I'm relatively young, and for a lot of our past have been a little bit under market in terms of compensation. But for our options pool, we're at, I think, just above 7%. We do have a 15% rolling pool. We've never even reached really the majority or half of that until this point.
Okay. With your production units,
Mhm.
is there a lot of wear and tear on the units? There are explosions in there, but there are explosions in gas engines, ice engines as well. Is this like you have to replace or fix this machines a lot of maintenance involved? How sort of can you just plug it in and let it run for a couple of months?
Overwhelmingly, yes. They run consistently day after day. There are certain components that will wear down because it is a hostile environment for most materials, but overwhelmingly, the structure, just being carbon steel, is extremely sturdy. So the majority of the reactor can last more than a decade, I would assume, or decades. And again, not that I'm going to disclose publicly, but there are various components that will just be part of our routine maintenance.
All right.
And I think I only have a few minutes left. So if you want to kind of pull out maybe a last couple questions, we can.
Yeah, there are a lot of repeats here, so I'm having to scroll and read through a lot here.
Mhm.
Well, how about I put it on to you, Kjirstin? Out of all the questions and everything we've discussed so far, are there any areas that you think we haven't discussed that we should discuss? Or what are the key areas that you think investors should be focused on in assessing Hydrograph? As
Mhm.
you're still relatively early stage. You're still a bit of a show me story. You haven't sold tons of product yet. You seem to be doing
Mhm.
all the right things and going in the right direction, but there's still a lot of unknown left. So given that context, what should investors be focused on here?
I think if for the average investor, they could as kind of basic as it sounds, just really try to understand graphene better. And I know it's hard and it's not that fun to read about material science, but the more from a fundamental or first principles perspective that they can really understand, read some of the patents, read our patent, read the patents of our competitors, start to understand the differences in feedstocks and production methods and resulting graphenes. And after that, read the application data, and I feel like for a lot of people, it's going to click what is so different about Hydrograph. Maybe they've already done this. But I think the more investors can really understand from a fundamental level what makes us different, that's going to give people a lot more confidence to kind of ride out a lot of this volatility that we've seen, because this has been a pretty wild ride. the past couple days. And I would assume that it could be like this really until we get to NASDAQ, and NASDAQ isn't gonna, in some sense be less volatility. It'll just be a lot more volume and a lot more liquidity. So hopefully we'll level off at a certain stage, especially with pending contracts. But I would really just promote education.
All right. One question here that is new. How much hiring or how much more do you need to grow your organization to, I don't know, hit scale, or within the next 12 months as you hit production as well as large commercial sales, presumably?
Good question. So I am absolutely understaffed. I'm looking currently for a full-time CFO. And I'm also looking for engineers in most areas, mechanical, chemical, process, mostly working, of course, within Austin with some travel to the new facility. So we're hiring, I would say, apart from that, but that would be the primary areas of focus.
Regarding staffing, Dr. Sorensen, how much of a key risk is he, kind of as a person, not to be morbid here, but what someone gets hit by a bus? How big is the team and the intellectual property and knowledge within the whole team without having a key man risk?
So what he's discovered is already commercial. So in terms of doing what we've been saying we're going to do, there is no risk there. In terms of the future, I don't want to think about the day that we lose Dr. Sorensen. I mean, I would say that we're close friends, and also he's just he's a very rare mind, and we're not going to find another Dr. Sorensen. So I'm hoping we have many, many more years left, and I think that there's a lot more that he can do apart from what we've talked about now, and we have a lot of plans for the future.
Okay, and sorry, cut me off when you need to. Yeah, like the work, the R&D that's going on, is it more on the commercialization side, or do you have, and I presume you can't be too specific, but you have product development, new plans on things to do and so forth? Can you, as much as you can say, comment on that?
So roughly said, the UK team is fully commercial. Dr. Sorensen, you you can't really, I don't know, put a label on him. Often he does something unexpected, and that is the highest value commercial product that we have. So you can't predict it. It's just pure science. It's really fundamental science, and that's what he does well. And I believe there will be high value commercial items that are generated from that process. And there will also be a lot of other things that come from that. So it's very hard to predict that early stage revenue process.
All right. There's one final question here.
Okay.
And so what about, are you doing anything with space elevators?
With space elevators. Oh, I wish I could talk about this, but I'm wondering, there's a group in the UK, I'm wondering who it's coming from, that is very keen on space elevators. So there are discussions, but we're not actively doing something.
Excellent. Kjirstin, thank you very much. And you sort of said your final comments. Any last words before we wrap it up here? And really appreciate your time. I think this was very valuable, and you gave a lot of good, solid information here. So, thank you. And any final thoughts or words?
No, I think, I could not have predicted the momentum that we've had. I really appreciate the support that we've had from the market. I know there's a lot of new people to the story. There's a lot of people that have been long-term holders. I really, thank you all for buying and holding. I also appreciate people that choose to take profit from this. It's really becoming a much larger company, and I think the most exciting days are ahead.
Excellent, Kjirstin. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, and yeah, get lots of work done there, and talk to you again soon, hopefully. Cheers.
Thank you. You too. Bye.